Welcome to the Sarah Finkelstein Show. Today is February 2nd, 2022, and today's topic is talking about final expenses. Have you started to plan for your final expenses? It's a topic that many of us don't want to talk about and we don't want to think about, but all of us will need to plan for this sooner or later. Benjamin Franklin had some really great quotes. And one of those is if you plan, if you fail to plan, in essence, you are planning to fail. Everything that we do in life requires a plan, whether it's going to college, getting our degrees, purchasing a home, it's all requires a plan, doesn't it? There's a lot of things that we all need to plan for. Throughout life, there's tons of items, but some of the most common ones that people think about is retirement. We all need to plan for that eventual day when we may retire, either part-time or full-time. But it is something that people plan for 30 to 40 years before they get there. Another item that we need to plan for is healthcare. Healthcare along the way, whether we're working or even after when we're retired. We need to plan for healthcare and legacy. Many of us have children, grandchildren, people that we love, and we want to plan to leave them something. That is called a legacy, leaving something to the next generation, or even leaving something to a favorite charity or the school that you attended that is planning for a legacy. So very important to many people. Legal documents. Let's not forget the importance of having legal documents in place before we have a crisis. There's a will, there's a trust, there's a power of attorney, there's a healthcare surrogate. Those are the most common legal documents that we should have. Maybe not necessarily a trust for everyone, but those are the most common legal documents that we all have heard about, and most of us need some or all of those. And lastly, our topic for today is final expenses. Now, what do I mean by final expenses? Some of you might be familiar with that term, and some of you may not. So final expenses refers to the fact that we're here on earth to live a good life, but there will come a day where we're not here anymore and we will have final expenses to deal with. So what are your final wishes? A lot of people have given some thought to this. Are your wishes to have cremation? Are your wishes to have a traditional burial? Yes, I know, again, this is a topic that we don't want to talk about, we don't want to think about. But if we don't plan for it, then our children will be left to scramble and figure out what did mom or dad really want as their final wishes. It's important to bring this out into the open so that everybody in the family knows what your wishes are and they can proceed accordingly and avoid family feuds between siblings arguing about, well, mom would have wanted that or mom would not have wanted that. And it just makes things easier for the family. We know when we lose a loved one, we grieve. It's a very sad thing. Having a loss is very difficult. It's tragic, but it's easier when we know what the path is that the person wanted, what mom wanted, what dad wanted. Makes things easier on the family. So what does a funeral cost on average? Now, of course, average depends where in the country, what kind of a funeral, but the average funeral runs approximately $7,900. Now, I could share with you that when my mother-in-law passed away 2.5 years ago, her funeral was more in the range of $15,000, but it varies, right? Depends. It all varies on what you want. But we know over time that these costs will go up in price. Just with inflation, everything, prices of goods and services do increase over time. So when we use the rule of 72, and I talk about the rule of 72 rather frequently because it's so simple and it's so easy to use. And sometimes we use the rule of 72 to figure out how long it takes before our money doubles at a certain interest rate. But I also use the rule of 72 to figure out what things may cost in the future. So for example, if inflation is 3%, we know that the prices of a funeral will double in 25 years. So that $8,000 funeral is going to be $16,000 in 25 years. If we feel that inflation is really a little bit higher, like 4%, tech support, then we know that the funeral cost will double in just 18 years. So the higher the inflation rate is, the quicker it takes for the cost to double. The sooner the cost will double. And if we look at an inflation rate of 5%, then we know that that cost of funeral will double in just 14 years. And if the relative is going to need a funeral in 30 years, then we know that that funeral cost will double twice. First in 14 years, and then again in another 14 years. So that's the rule of 72. If you've never heard of it, feel free to use it. It's really powerful. I just love the rule of 72. Have you heard of final expense life insurance? It is a life insurance policy. A final expense policy typically is a small life insurance policy. It might be 10,000. Some people opt for 15,000 or $20,000. That policy will cover the costs of the funeral. Was there another slide in between? There is also, thank you, tech support. There is also something called pre-need planning. Now, I have never heard of this until my mother-in-law brought it to my attention, because my mother was alive at the time and she was not well. And my mother-in-law had recommended that I do pre-need planning for my mother. It's a policy that you get with, say, a local cemetery. And they have programs where you can buy in advance and it locks in the price of the funeral. So that's something that helped me because it helped me keep the cost down, because we know with inflation the costs are going to increase. But when you do pre-need planning, you're locking in today's rates for the future. And another thing that pre-need planning did for me is it, like I said, when you lose a loved one, you grieve. But the funeral part of it was all taken care of. It was all done in advance. So I didn't have a crisis to deal with. I didn't have to run around and figure out where am I going to go? What am I going to do? It was all figured out way in advance. And it makes the grieving process a little easier. I came across a publication which is called My Final Wishes Organizer. It's a booklet and it's very, very helpful. You can put in lots of information in here that will help your family. For example, you can indicate where your important documents are and where you were born and what your occupation was for those relatives that really didn't know. It's a really great little booklet and it talks about your cemetery and so on and so forth. Um, this booklet, I do have a whole bunch of them, and I would be more than happy to share with anybody that wants a copy of this by snail mail. I'd be more than happy to put in an envelope and just mail it out to you. And the interesting thing about this publication is when you flip it over, 9 things every senior needs to know about funerals. So I find this little booklet quite helpful, and I would be very happy to share with anybody who wants a copy. Got a stack of them, so why not, right? It's all about planning and knowing what's out there and what's available to help life make things easier, make the planning process easier. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. If you'd like to get this organizer, I'd be more than happy to send it out to you. And thank you for joining the Sarah Finkelstein Show. I hope you will join us again tomorrow.